I haven't gone through all the language, and I apologize, but I'll make the motion to remove 2E from our agenda.
Okay. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say
My
aye.
hand is raised.
Board Member Levy?
Thank you so much. Quick question. I'm assuming that the changes that are made, since this is Title I, are coming from legal changes in DPI. So has this already been vetted through legal and with recommendations from DPI?
That is correct. This is actually what was sent to us from our legal counsel.
Okay, so there's no reason, to vet this through legal because that has already happened. So, Committee Chair Nichols, am I understanding that we are to remove this from the agenda this evening because you're uncomfortable and because Board Member Hankins didn't have an opportunity to fully review it?
My reasoning has nothing to do with Board Member Hankins. My reasoning is because of what I just stated.
No, I didn't conflate the two things.
Okay.
I said because you were uncomfortable, because it's already been vetted through legal. Just asking, is that accurate? Did I understand you correctly?
Correctly. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Oh. Board President Johnson.
It's something else. Never mind.
Aye.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Board Member Levy, are you going to vote?
Are you going to offer me the opportunity to object? I'm a nay. You didn't call for that. You just called for the
Okay.
ayes.
Nays?
Nay.
Okay. Motion carried 4-1, 3-1.
Chairman Nichols, I've got perhaps an unusual request to add an item between C and D for meeting opening. If we could just take a moment of silence in
Thank you, Board President Johnson. I actually had that thought on the way here, and yeah, it's I would ask that we do take a moment of silence for the folks in Georgia, Appalachia High School in Barrow County, not too terribly far from where I used to live. So let's take a moment of silence. Thank you. Item 1D, approval of minutes for the July 3rd. Board Member Levy.
Oh, I'm just placing my hand so you can see that
Okay.
if there's a motion in a second, I would like to participate in discussion.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the July 3rd minutes?
I make a motion that we approve the minutes from the July 3rd meeting.
Okay. Is there a second? I'll second. Is there any discussion? Board Member Levy.
Thank you so much. Just a few items. Under number 2, that second paragraph, it says that Levy asked if the administration had been offered input on this language. Dr. Garrison indicated that he only received at the committee. I believe that meeting probably should be entered there at the committee meeting. And then a couple sentences under that, it says Nichols stated, yes, it's just a proposal. Hankins stated he didn't. Let me just scroll down. Levy clarified it was a policy. I was seeking clarification because I had no clue what was going on. So if we could change that to Levy asked or Levy sought clarification, that would make that accurate. And then I had a question after reading the minutes up a little bit further. It said, President Johnson clarified that the committee is just looking for the board to provide input. And this is for the gender language policy. So after I read that in the minutes, I was confused because Board President Johnson told me that that happened in January of this year. And when I asked at a regular board meeting if she could give me the date for when the board provided guidance for this policy, she reminded me that we were in the middle of a meeting, which I was aware of, but I still haven't received that information. But my question is, Board President Johnson, are these notes accurate? Were you looking for the full board to provide input, or are you still holding the position that that happened in January? I just want to make sure our minutes are accurate.
At the time, I thought it was January. I went back, and it was actually February.
Okay, so just as a side note, if you could provide me that date, and not in this moment, please, because I don't believe that happened. I don't believe that the board offered guidance on this topic. And so if you're saying that happened, then I'm not sure if the statement and the minutes are accurate. So if you could clarify that, that would be helpful.
Board Member Levy,
So here's my question. Let me try to make it more clear. Board President Johnson, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're now saying that the board didn't give guidance in January about gender language, but it happened in February. But in the minutes, it says, President Johnson clarified that the committee is just looking for the board to provide input. So is that accurate, or are you saying that the input came in February? I just want to make sure our minutes are
I
accurate.
don't know where that statement came from because I did not say that the committee is just looking for the board to provide input.
Okay, so
That's not a statement that I recall saying, and it's not one that I believe I said, because this had been at the board level back in February, and it needs to be taken care of at the committee level, the development of this policy, so we can move on with how we write our policies. So if Ms. Shope wants to take that statement out, I'm okay with that. If the committee is okay with that.
okay. Mrs. Shope?
So I believe the point of that statement, and I'm happy to remove it if after I say this, that's what you want me to do, was that, because I did go back and re-listen to this meeting, was that President Johnson was saying that the committee was looking for full board input on that particular language, which is why it was being recommended to move forward from committee. That was what I was getting out of the conversation when I re-listened to it. I'm happy to remove it if that's what you would prefer to do, or I'm happy to add input on this particular language. I'll do whatever is the will of the committee.
I'm good if you remove it. Board Member Levy, what was the minor change you had down in that paragraph what you first mentioned?
You'll have to be more specific.
Well, it was the first item you brought up when you first started talking. You mentioned that.
Oh, that I believe the word meeting was missing?
Okay. Only received at the committee meeting, correct?
That's correct.
Mrs. Shope, would you make that change, please? Okay. Board Member Hankins?
I would just like to ask Dr. Garrison if that is a correct statement then, because it is about, I think it's about what you had said, or that you didn't learn about that till that meeting. Is that a correct statement then?
Yeah, that was my
That'll clear it up.
Sorry, that was my statement that, of course, at that time, I had only heard about it at that meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Now, could I get a motion with those changes?
There's already a motion in the second. We just engaged in discussion.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Okay, then the next item is August 7th minutes. Could I get a motion for approval?
I move that we approve the August 7th meeting of the Policy Committee.
Is there a second? Okay, I'll second. Any discussion? Board Member Levy.
Thank you so much. I just have a question. I am on page 2, the last sentence in the second paragraph. It says Beavers, and we were talking about, for those playing along at home, the Code of Conduct audit. And Beavers indicated that the work being done could be presented, and then Nichols indicated that he would like Beavers to come back with more information as discussed. Did we determine when that would happen?
We did not.
Okay, just wanted to make sure that the minutes were accurate. Also, on page 3, about halfway down, when there was a discussion about potentially having a policy meeting the following week, and Board Chair Nichols, you and Mr. Chady were kind of working out a time for a meeting to happen. I read in the minutes, it's about halfway down that second paragraph, it was decided that Mr. Chady will work on the policy without any committee members and will then send it back to the committee. So that meeting didn't happen that Friday at 1 o'clock?
No, it did not happen that Friday at 1 o'clock.
Okay, perfect. So the minutes are accurate.
Yes.
I believe that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Any other discussion? Could I have a motion to approve?
We already have a motion
Okay.
and a second.
Okay.
We just concluded discussion.
Okay, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. Okay, on to policies review. Policy A is to rescind the motion from the July 3rd meeting, moving to send the proposed gender policy language to the full board for consideration and input. Do I have a motion?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was lost in that.
We're looking at 2A, rescind the motion from July 3rd meeting to send the proposed gender policy, gender language. I think that's a duplicate. To the full board for consideration and input.
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. Is there discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Any abstentions?
I abstain.
Okay, motion carries 2-1, 2-0. Okay. Okay, the next item is the actual gender identity language policy, policy 115. Okay, the floor is open for discussion.
Just for clarification, you want to do discussion prior to the motion, which you can absolutely do.
No, you're correct. I'd ask for a motion to recommend to the full board, policy 115. To the full Board of Education, the addition of policy 115, gender identifying language for first reading.
So moved.
Is there a second? I'll second. Okay, any discussion?
Yes.
Board Member Levy.
Thank you so much. And just for clarification, you can absolutely have discussion before there's a motion. If you look at Robert's Rules of Order, the 12th edition revised, when you look at small boards, which we would be considered because we're smaller than 12, you can absolutely have discussion and then come to a motion. So just wanted to throw that out there in case anyone wanted to take advantage of that because we are considered a small board. With this policy, I do have a recommendation for an edit. So I will read it and look forward to feedback from my colleagues. The School District of Beloit uses he, she, they pronouns in district communications. They is used to represent all gender expressions not covered with he or she. The School District of Beloit is committed to diversity and inclusion and seeks to create an environment where expressed identities of students, staff, and community members are acknowledged and respected. I completely hear what my colleagues have previously said with he, she, they does not include everyone. And when would we stop? Because there are literally pages of different gender expressions. So I believe that this is a reasonable compromise. And again, I'll just reread those first two sentences of my proposed edit. The School District of Beloit uses he, she, they pronouns in district communications. They is used to represent all gender expressions not covered with he or she. So I think the benefit of this is twofold. One, we continue with the years-long practice of our updated gender language of he, she, they. I'm not sure how complicated that is to search for them in policy and switch out the language. I'm sure Ms. Shope does. And then two, I think it honors the spirit of what is in our strategic plan and hopefully in communications throughout our district that we want to acknowledge and respect different gender expressions. And I think this is a succinct way to blend the two ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. Any other discussion?
Board Member Levy, I'm trying to, what the change would be, they, them, their, and then you go on to say that, explain it, is that, please just go back to how we're going to change what is already up on our screen right now, or what has been proposed.
I'm actually looking for a replacement, and
Right.
here's why. So the current gender language, first of all, thank you for the question, is he, she, they. And I completely heard my colleagues that say that is inadequate. And I tend to agree because I don't think it's possible for us to capture every gender expression identifier. But for this, I think what the proposed change on the sheet that we have, what it does, in my opinion, is neutralizes gender. So you don't know what the gender expression is. And what I am recommending is that we keep he, she, they, and then explain what they means or our intention behind using they. So we're not neutralizing gender. It's a practical way, I believe, because it's not changing the language that's currently found in policy, but it's acknowledging that when we say they, it is to acknowledge all other gender expressions that people use to identify themselves without using the he pronoun, without losing the she pronoun, which again, many people use. So again, I think it's a practical way to be respectful of different gender expressions, and being consistent with the language that we have used, but offering a deeper explanation of what they means. So hopefully that answers your question.
I'm halfway there, and thank you so much for that. I'm reading, what I think I'm hearing is he, she, they, and then what would be the next statement after that to clarify what they means? Could you repeat what you said on that clarification of they? Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. And I think it's only like 3 sentences. So if you don't mind indulging me, I'll just read it one more time. The school district of Beloit uses he, she, they pronouns in district communications. And the reason I said that, because that would include policy, that would include our strategic plan, like in district communications. They is used to represent all gender expressions not covered with he or she. The school district of Beloit is committed to diversity and inclusion and seeks to create an environment where expressed identities of students, staff, and community members are acknowledged and respected. And I would love, if it's okay with Board Chair Nichols, to hear from our administration to see if this proposed language would meet the spirit of our district communications and how we want to communicate internally and to our community.
Before he goes, can I do a follow-up? I just don't want to get redundant, and I don't know if we are. Well, the part of that last sentence, it's in our strategic plan. I think a lot of that verbiage that you expressed, and repeating again at this stage gets, for just this, explaining it, it's already been stated that what the district's intent is. So I'm me personally right now, and just reviewing that, I'm okay with it, but I don't want to make it too long, that we're repeating things that are in the strategic plan and what the district is all about.
No, I hear what, oh, I'm so sorry. Am I able to reply to?
I was just going to give Board Member Hankins something to maybe help clarify. If you look at the agenda page, you will see the background information, which is a piece out of the U.S. Department of Labor. And if you want to read that, it kind of explains where I'm coming from.
I did read that, yes, and
Okay.
I get it. But, okay, thank you. I think Nichols, Mr. Chairman Nichols, I'm good at right now. Thank you.
Okay. Any other discussion? Board President Johnson.
Thank you, Chairman Nichols. I like the use, the school district of Beloit uses they/them to cover all personal pronouns in board policies. I don't think that, and we can have a statement in there that if the committee wants to add a statement saying that the they/them covers all pronouns, that would include the she and he pronouns. We don't, I just don't see the need for pulling out the she and he. If we're saying they and them is going to cover all pronouns, she, and I would actually include the word personal pronouns, You know, that's, I would think that that's kind of evident.
Okay, may I clarify, please? So you're saying at the end of this this three-line policy, or the pronouns, say that again, what did you say? Or the pronouns they, them, and
Or the personal pronouns.
personal, okay.
They/them, and their, the possession, maybe parentheses, possessive form, represents all pronouns. And then, she and he are personal pronouns, and therefore would be represented under they/them.
Okay. Board Member Hankins.
Yeah, just going back before that, could you, it's in, I guess it's all one sentence. Students, parents, teachers, and employees, and then it's et cetera. Who could that be? Who are we talking about? And does that cause any problems?
It could well, in the school district, it could include custodians. It could in culinary individuals. Again, we could go on and on and on. So that's why the use of the word is the et cetera. So.
So the contracted services, is that what I'm hearing? Kinda? Also? I'm just asking, because
Okay.
I just wanted to make sure it reads.
So, for example, every person in the school district that's going to school is a student, correct? And so, you understand that, right?
Correct.
Okay. Board President Johnson.
Board Member Hankins, in reading state statutes, city ordinances, county policies, they're written using the noun as much as possible. And the pronouns are very seldomly used. For whatever reasons, our policies use pronouns much more frequently than when you start reading these other governmental agencies, how they write theirs. So here, where they say the appropriate nouns, any human noun could be put there. So,
I completely understand that. My last question to committee chair was more on the et cetera, what that meant. I'm not the pronouns, but the who needs to use it or adopts the use of such as, such as anyone employed or in the buildings or, I know what we're getting at, but I'm not talking about the pronouns. I'm talking about who this applies to. Mm-hmm. How overreaching is it, or does it need to be? Does that need to be tidied up a little, is what I'm saying, ETC?
Well, for example, that would include coaches.
I understand
Okay. Okay.
but it's all encompassing.
Mm-hmm.
Again, going back to pronouns, is there an all-encompassing something for such as? I don't like the such as. It's kind of opening a door to who needs to use this and who doesn't. Is there an all-encompassing, like any person on school district property?
May I?
Mrs. Beavers.
I think what he's saying is if you're speaking in a sentence, you're using that pronoun. Like, I don't think he's trying to give an all-encompassing list of who needs to use this language, but if I'm saying a sentence, I can say the students, the teachers must, blah, 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 instead of using he, she, they. Am I correct?
Yes, you are.
Not talking about who all has to use this language. Does that help or not?
Maybe, I think my mind is stuck somewhere that who this policy applies to. And maybe that's in the policy guidelines, you know, whoever, you know what I mean? When we open anybody who has to follow the guide or the policies is listed before that then, right? Who's ever covered by our policies, this encompasses. I thought, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to make this more problematic than it isn't, than it is. But when we start, I just thought that in my own little brain, you know, we start singling out blah, 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 and then it's ETC. But I'm just wondering if the verbiage could be more of who our policies, who has to adhere to our policies. Is there a name for that?
So if I,
And that's what I mean. I'm not talking about the pronoun usage per se.
All human beings employed by the district.
There you go. That's what. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
so
Board President Johnson.
Board Member Hankins, this is not saying who is using these pronouns. This is saying, for the appropriate nouns such as student, parents, teachers, and employees, what they're saying there is take for example, the subject of the sentence. So we might have a policy that says parents will drop their children off at the school by 8 a.m. So we're not saying, so there, the subject of the sentence, the parent. So that's, we're not saying that that parent has to
Oh, I see what you're saying.
identify with
We can't
any,
identify the parent.
with any pronoun or anything. All we're saying is that parent is going to drop their kid off at 8 a.m. We might further say the parent will drop their child off at 8 a.m. and then move their car out of the lane. So there, we're not going to repeat and necessarily say the parent will drop their kid off at 8 a.m. and move the parent's car out of the lane. We're just using the pronoun then to reflect on that parent. And instead of saying the parent, his or hers or theirs, we're just going to say the parent is going to drop their kid off at 8 a.m. and move their car. So we don't have to do his, hers, theirs, to simplify. So this is not going to affect anyone in the buildings in terms of how they identify. Everyone's going to be free to identify however they want. We embrace that, we support that, we celebrate that. What this says is for efficiency in writing our policies.
Okay.
That's all that is.
Actually, it does pertain to publications, publications, communications, which covers policies. So, any written communications. So, Mrs. Beavers, anything else? Okay, thank you. Oh, Dr. Garrison.
For, since I've been here, we have used the pronouns he, she, they, and pretty much everything that we've written. I understood why we did it when I came here. I also understood that our district has been very inclusive in our approach, not only in our strategic plan, but also in how we've been doing our policies. With that being stated, being all inclusive in a school district means a lot to the district administration. I think that we have had so many conversations about this between myself and Missy, I can't even count, around kind of how we can make sure that we are still will remain inclusive, even if, this changes. I made the suggestion back at the last conversation as a possible compromise, not necessarily compromise, but as a possible suggestion that we say, even if this stays the same here, for simplicity, let me just skip reading the whole thing. Students, parents, teachers, and employees, etc., or the pronouns he, she, they, them. He, she, they, and them, period. And now that gives, in essence, one space off of this last part that you have here at the end. So he, she, they, and them. And in that case, we still capture kind of honor what we have been doing, and also bringing in the new thoughts. Or you can be they, them, he, and she. I don't care how we put it in order, but it's just a space in which I would propose as an option as well. Missy, you have something to think about that?
I don't disagree with that either. Ms. Levy, can you read yours again?
Sure. The School District of Beloit uses he, she, they pronouns in district communications. They is used to represent all gender expressions not covered with he or she. The School District of Beloit is committed to diversity and inclusion and seeks to create an environment where expressed gender identities of students, staff, and community members are acknowledged and respected.
Thanks. I like that.
Any other discussion? Board President Johnson, would you read the end of what you said at the end again? At the end of the sentence, would you please?
In terms of the school.
You said, or the personal pronouns they. You said personal pronouns, right?
Yes.
That's the word you inserted.
Adopts the appropriate nouns such as students, parents, teachers,
Right.
employees, etc., or the
Personal
pronouns, and I would take that comma, I would remove the comma, they/them, and their as the possessive form.
Okay, I have a question. So I guess it's a question. Why can't we remove the them and I mean not the them, remove the slash and say they or them or their.
You could, yeah.
Okay. Dr. Garrison.
Thank you. He and she has been a part of, I don't know, English language forever.
So is they them.
So is they them, they're correct. And I just feel like, we may be splitting hairs over the thought. However, my compromise that's still my compromise. I believe we could use he, she, they, and them, period, at the end of this sentence, and maybe that's a compromise there. However, that's what I was mentioning as my thought. And I guess I just don't want anyone to think that we wouldn't be, again, we will be honoring students and who they are, as Board President Johnson just mentioned.
Correct.
I just want to make sure that the public knows that we still will accept all of our students how they show up. As a public school, we have to. So I still like the he, she, they, and them at the end of this sentence. Drop there. We don't need the possessive. That's my opinion. and everything else can still stay there and we move forward. That's just my space at the current time.
Thank you, Dr. Garrison. But I do have a question. So, but they and them is all inclusive, correct?
She is as well.
No, no, there's he, so that's one, then there's she, that's another, and then there's they, which covers both of them, and there covers both of them. They or them covers both of them, or 20.
Like I said, that's just where I am.
Okay.
I mean, that's just where I am at the current time. And, the board has to, of course, make this conversation move forward.
Thank you.
Because we do need to get it so that we can get back to, of
Correct.
course, the rest of our policies and stuff. Yeah.
Board President Johnson?
If you have, if there's confusion, you could add a statement saying they, them, and their represent or cover all personal pronouns.
Well, I thought we were going to say, or the personal pronouns they, them, and their.
Right, but didn't you just ask, doesn't they, them represent all pronouns?
Yes.
And for our purposes, and you could say, for our purposes, the pronouns they, them, and their cover all pronouns, all personal pronouns.
Okay, so are you suggesting a second sentence? Yeah, okay. Say it again, all personal pronouns?
For our purposes, they, them, and their represent all personal pronouns.
They, them, and they represent all. Say that again.
Represent all personal pronouns?
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yes. Thank you. So, for the purpose of inclusive, and concise language in all district publications and communications, the School District Board of Education adopts the use of appropriate nouns such as students, parents, teachers, and employees, etc. For our purposes, they, them, and their represent all personal pronouns. Board Member Hankins.
I totally agree with what was just stated. I know we probably have to amend our motion. I think it's moved and seconded. If we're going to add anything, and I go back to what Board Member Levy brought up, and maybe I like conciseness, and to point that maybe a short sentence, I don't want to paraphrase what she said, but I know what the point was, to get back that the district isn't all-inclusive, but maybe there's a short verbiage that says refer back to our something, or whatever. If we're going to add anything on, and I guess that gets problematic and gets lengthy too, but I know, I think I know what Board Member Levy is getting at, and I think it is important, but I don't think we need to restate the whole intent of it becomes too long and lengthy, but I don't know what I do. I'm talking in circles, so I'm happy with the way it's stated, as you just stated, Chairman Nichols.
So I guess we need to vote on the original motion, that recommendation that I read, and then we'll read the new one and vote again. So, Board Member Levy.
Thank you so much. Back to my previous point about where we are free to have discussion before we arrive at a motion. That would prevent us from having a motion and a second and then needing to vote it down and then having a new motion or amend the motion that's already on the floor. It is perfectly fine for small boards, less than 12, to have discussion, flesh everything out, and then come to a motion.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. So the motion on the floor has been first and seconded. All those in favor say aye. All those in favor say nay. Or opposed?
Nay.
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 Okay. Motion failed. Now I will reread the new policy. For the purpose of inclusive and concise language in all district publications and communications, the School District Board of Education adopts the use of appropriate nouns such as students, parents, teachers, and employees, etc. For our purposes, they, them, or their represent all personal pronouns, period. Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Could I get a second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays?
Nay.
Pass 2-1. We're on to 2C, Policy 672-1, Purchasing and Bidding Requirements. So the recommended action is to move to recommend to the full Board of Education approval of the revisions of Policy 672.1, Purchasing/bidding requirements for first reading. Could I get a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion, please. Board Member Levy.
Thank you so much. So to bring up a point that I brought up at our last meeting, I'm not sure why we're not reviewing policy sets in number groupings. And the reason why that's a concern is the only purchasing policy that's on the agenda this evening is 672.1, purchasing/bidding requirements. And my concern is any edits we make to this policy without looking at the main policy that precedes this, 672 purchasing, or 672.2 local purchasing, 672.4 vendor relations, 672.4 Rule 1 vendor relations guidelines, 672.5 protection and guarantees for construction and renovation projects, and finally 672.6 purchasing of custodial supplies. All of those are in the purchasing set of policies. So any edits made to one policy without simultaneously reviewing the others in that group can put our administration in a position where they have conflicting policies. So then what do they follow? So if we make edits to this, but not 672 or any of those that I listed, I think it puts the administration in a very difficult position. For example, custodial, purchasing custodial supplies, since we now are outsourcing that, I'm not sure if the district even purchases custodial supplies. I would be surprised if we did. Seems like that would be a part of that outsourced contract. So that might be a policy that we need to consider retiring. So for that reason, I actually move that we postpone the review of policy 672.1 until we can review it in the policy set to make sure that we are not creating a larger problem for our administration where they have to act with conflicting policies.
Any other discussion? Board Member Hankins?
Well, actually, I just made a motion, so if you could call to see if there's a second.
We already have a first and a second on the original motion.
It's an amendment. Amendments precede main motions.
Board Member Hankins?
Well, just part of the discussion, and I hope we're still in discussion mode. I'd like to hear from Mr. Chady on his whole take on this. I mean, this directly affects his everyday job. So I think it's imperative that we get his input, and I think that's what Mrs. Levy is getting at. Please, if it's appropriate.
Sure. So, I'm appreciative of the changes to the policy that's brought before the board or the policy committee today as compared to a month ago. That increases the threshold for board authorization or prior approval from $10,000 to $25,000, which I think is more appropriate. I still think that that's lower than it needs to be, ought to be, should be, but that's not my policy. It's yours as the policy committee and the board to determine. I do have reservations about some of the other stuff contained in the policy. Honestly, I feel it's been rushed. But again, that's not for me to decide. That's for the policy committee to decide. There was a question with regards to the policy sequence and the policy with regards to purchasing custodial supplies. Just for clarification, the district purchases custodial supplies. That's not part of the contract with HES. They order on the district's behalf, but we receive and we pay for those.
Thank you. Also, could you address the groupings? Does this one affect the other ones, as was suggested? And I ask because I don't know.
That's a good question. I would have to go back and reread. I think looking at policy groupings together is often wise. And from my past experience, I would say it's also a good best practice to look at similar policies with other school districts, municipal governments. WASB has sample policies accumulated from the field as well, that we can derive from.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Dr. Garrison.
Sure, thank you. When I think about, Mr. Chady's statements, I do agree with his statements. I don't want the public to think that me and Mr. Chady aren't having conversations about these policies. We are. One of the things that I think we have to remember is that, when we're looking at purchases and, here in the district, I know that there's been some concerns around our budgets, and I just want to make sure that everyone is very clear that the school district will continue to monitor how we spend, and we'll continue to monitor what gets brought to the board, especially if it changes to $25,000 based off of the recommendation. I'm split hairs on that. I still think it should have stayed at 50,000. However, we are willing to work with the committee and make sure that this is something that we can kind of move forward from that perspective. Secondly, because I know some of these things they change. As it pertains to the looking at things in policy sets, I do know that there's been conversations about that here at the board level. Sometimes there's a lot of policies that come in a set, and that we can just look at a set in a meeting, and so that's a possibility that we've of course have gotten used to. I will say, but there's also times where district administration may not have a set to bring or a policy that needs to be changed based off of in a set. That may be something that comes up that we need to take a look at, and in that space, the individual space could also be used. I do think we should sometimes take a closer look at the sets because, again, as Mr. Chady mentioned, of course, Mrs. Levy has mentioned as well, that I don't want to be, doing anything wrong, and that's just a possibility that falls into this. I do trust my team, and of course, we look at policies and to make sure that we're not doing anything wrong. But that is why the set conversation is important. But I did want to bring up that sometimes there are individual policies that we do need to just take a look at, and it might not fall in the set mentality. But that's again very, very sporadic when that does happen. It's typically based off of when something is happening in the district where we need to address a specific.
Okay. Board Member Hankins.
Yeah, just a comment. I know we're in the middle of a motion, but the comment from Board Member Levy, I take it to heart, that I think it was a very wise thing to take these things in sets. And with Mr. Chady's input and Dr. Garrison's, I think it'd be wise to take this, whatever we're going to do with it, but then look at it as a set so we don't create further problems down the road for admin and us. And I appreciate all the comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hanks, and yes, thanks for all the comments. And I'll take that under advisement. I think for the next meeting, we would take a look at all those policies that you recommended, Board Member Levy. Board Member Levy, you have another question or discussion?
Just to provide clarification, if we send this on to the full board and it's approved, we meet once a month. The full board meets bi-monthly. So we could potentially have a policy, an active policy, that conflicts the rest of that policy set. That's why you look at policies together. So if this policy is directing the administration to follow one set of rules under purchasing, all of the other purchasing policies that I mentioned that are not on the agenda, if they have conflicting information, your administrators are always supposed to follow policy. So what do they do in that scenario? So that's why I think the prudent thing to do is to postpone this until you can look at it as a set.
Mr. Chady, when you and I discussed this, neither you nor I brought up the sets. Is that correct? Looking at sets? I know I did.
I don't believe that we addressed the sets at all, though I'm going through, just for information purposes for the committee, in preparation for that meeting, I printed and have in my hands right here the entire 672 policies, along with policy 674, emergency procurement and expenditure authority. Because again, I would agree, they need to be reviewed, they should be reviewed in their entirety. And not to say that we need to follow the policies of other school districts or the WASB, but I think there's a lot of logic in reviewing some of those because the insights that you can get can be very applicable to our circumstances and help us craft and formulate language that is used elsewhere. And I'll just, my research, looking at all of the Rock County school districts with regards to policy thresholds requiring school board approval, only identified 3 districts that have that in their policy to begin with. So, the majority of the districts don't encumber the process by requiring board approval for certain purchasing. I understand why that's being requested and being considered. But again, I think we're trying to solve a problem from years ago and not a problem of recent.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned policy 674. That's the emergency policy, correct?
Correct.
Procurement?
Yep.
Okay. So would that policy, as it's written today, cover what the items that Board Member Levy mentioned, that you would be in a pickle? Would that cover that?
I think Board Policy 674, as it's written today, provides some coverage for the district in certain situations. I mean, it's explicit in the event of a major incident affecting the interest of the district. And it also provides authority of spending up to $150,000, which I know many people think of, that's a heck of a lot of money, and I agree with that. But in the circumstances of an event of a major incident affecting the district, I think that's woefully insufficient, and that the people that are in play during such incidents ought to have the authority to do more. But that's a different policy number. So.
If there's an emergency that happens, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to comment on 674. It gives the superintendent the authority to spend up to $150,000, and the superintendent would make all efforts to contact the president in terms of if there is the need, and if the president is unavailable, then the vice president, and so on down the line. So this doesn't really, the 672 doesn't really interfere with this one.
For that clarification. So,
You want me to
Oh, just excuse me. The amendment did not receive a second, so it died. There is no amendment. It's just the main motion.
okay. So, all those in favor of forwarding 672.1 building requirements policy to the full board, say aye.
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 Aye. Nays?
Nay.
Okay, the next one is item 2D, policy 512, animals on district property. And, I'm sorry. Sure.
So this is a policy that we have been, discussing most recently here in the school district due to some things that have happened with one of our staff members. And Mrs. Almendaris and I had discussed the possibilities of what that would actually look like from a service animal perspective. At the time, we were looking at this policy from a student perspective mostly, And at that point, then I was like, well, we're really focusing on the staff, and that's when I had to bring Mrs. Beavers into the conversation. And so naturally now we got a triad happening, where it started with a conversation with me and Dee Dee, and then of course I mentioned that we probably need to, of course, wrap Missy into the conversation as well. And so now we're here at this policy, and I'm gonna turn it over to Mrs. Beavers to give us the, well, Mrs. Beavers or Mrs. Almendares to give us the overview of why we believe the said changes are necessary for this new service animal opportunity in the district. I do believe it will benefit both our staff and students, and so from a high-level overview, I believe this is something that can be easily implemented in our district and benefit both, again, staff and students. Mrs. Almendares.
Thank you. So, as you stated, we had a policy for students. We also had a separate policy for vendors, et cetera. So when we recognize that we don't have a policy specific to staff who may need an accommodation, Ms. Beavers and we combined our resources to identify a single policy that would encompass all of those needs for our district, whether it be teachers bringing animals in as part of the educational curriculum, whether it's a staff member who needs the support for ADA reasons of a service animal, or it is a visitor that is coming in that needs the aid of a service animal, or a student, but also if police bring in one of their animals. So this policy attempts to combine all of those different instances where the district may have animals on district property.
I think it's important to note as well that regardless of when the animals are brought in, there's proper notification as well that has to be done. And that's something that's also captured in the policy. Again, you all have had time to kind of review it and look at it, and we'll take those questions. But again, in the policy, it gives very specifics around when we can, when people are needing this support, what proper channels they should go through in order to make sure that we all are on the same page.
I honestly don't, I don't have any questions, any discussion by any of the other board members. Board Member Levy?
Oh, thank you. You read my mind before I put my hand up.
Actually, I was watching your fingers, sorry.
No need to apologize. So here's my concern. There is a request before us to update the content in policy 383, which is not necessarily for students, but for a teacher, because that is guidelines for the use of animals in the classroom. So my assumption, absent a show and tell, which I don't even know if we do anymore, I'm dating myself, students are not bringing animals to the classroom for educational purposes. That may be the adult in the classroom. So again, we're being requested to update the content in policy 383, which is K-12 guidelines for the use of animals in the classroom, and policy 383.1, service animals in schools. So this will result in the retirement of those two policies that I just listed and placing the updated information into a 500 series, which is personnel. So a change of that. My concern is similar to my concern on the last policy, is that 383 and 383.1 don't appear on our agenda. So we can't handle all of this at one. We can't retire those two and move forward with this information. So if I'm opposed to it, not the content, but procedurally how we're going about doing this. So if this moves on to the full board, this policy will be approved, and then we'll have redundant and sometimes conflicting policy also active, which is problematic. So I would actually offer an amendment that we postpone the review of policy 512, animals on district properties, until the October 2nd policy committee meeting so we can address all parts of the request. And just to reiterate, we are being requested to move the information from 383 and 383.1 and retire those policies and shift it from the 300 series to the 500 series. None of which I have a problem with. It's just that 2 of the 3 items that need to be addressed don't appear on tonight's agenda.
They do appear on the agenda page.
They don't appear on the agenda that was posted. So they're listed for information, but they are not listed as an agenda item for action. So you can have something for reference, just like with the gender policy, I believe there was another thing attached for a reference. Later on the cell phone stuff, there's something attached for a reference, but it's not listed on the noticed agenda for us to take action on.
Thank you. I see what you're referring to.
Mr. Chady?
I know, a little bit weird, right, the business guy? I haven't thoroughly read the proposed policy, though I question, just want to have clarification here. I'm assuming that the policy is applicable on school days, during school functions, i.e. people that perhaps may be walking on school facilities right now with an animal. The policies would seem to say that they can't.
Well, technically, it's a stretch. It's good to have a policy that addresses the procedures for an employee to have a service animal with them. The individual did provide sufficient notice, as will be required under the ADA. So I would be very hesitant to retract any use of that service animal by an employee at this time because of an error on our part to have a policy and/or to properly list it on the agenda.
Board President Johnson.
The cabinet members, can you tell me the, sorry, let me pull that up. The 512 animals on district property, is there anything in the 512 proposed policy that's in direct conflict with the 300 level policies? Then, I was asking if there is anything in the proposed 512 policy that's in direct conflict with the 300 level policies.
No.
Is it possible for us to move forward with moving the 512 forward and then next meeting eliminating or retiring, thank you, retiring the 300 level ones?
Absolutely, they would overlap. There's nothing in those that we would be retiring that is contradicted by 512. It's just adding the staff piece, so it would be great if we could.
Okay. Chairperson Nichols, would you consider doing that?
I would. Any other discussion on that?
Could we have like a 90-second recess? Because I believe when I was perusing the 318 or the 382, I believe that there was an issue. So if we could just pause for a moment.
Okay. Take 2 minutes.
So generous of you. Thank you.
Do you need 3?
We'll find out. I'm good.
You good?
Yep, I found it.
Okay. So could I get a motion to move to
I'm sorry, I found the conflict that I would like to discuss. No, I could have been more clear. All right, so and we did say 3
Please
minutes.
continue.
I can
Please.
wait until everyone returns.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, 383.1.
Okay, we're going to continue, and Board Member Levy has some information.
Okay, so if we're looking at policy 512, and I'm in Roman numeral 3 under service animal for parent, vendor, visitor, or other. When the work or task, the service animal is readily apparent, district representatives should not ask. Under no circumstance should the district representative require documentation such as proof that the animal has been certified, trained, or licensed as a service animal from parent, vendor, visitor, or others who are non-students or employees of the district. All right. Now, when we look at 383.1, service animals in school, which doesn't define which category. It's just a service animal in a school building. Service animals, and then it says a service animal means any dog that is individually trained to do work or perform tasks for the benefit of an individual with a disability, including physical, sensory, psychiatric, intellectual, or other mental disability. The service animal's performance of such work task must be directly related to the individual's disability. So how would we confirm that if someone didn't ask? The work or task performed must be directly related to the individual's disability. The provision of emotional support, therapy, comfort, or companionship or crime deterrent effects of an animal's presence do not constitute work or task for the purpose of this definition and policy. So if an individual, like a guest, brings a service dog and they're like, well, they don't have to disclose, but let's say this dog brings me comfort. In one policy, we're like, no, that doesn't count as work that we have to verify. And in the other policy, it's like, don't ask, come one, come all. And you're shaking your head no and yes.
Yeah. So I see where you're coming from.
So
yes.
my concern is if both of those policies are active, who does what when?
Okay, so there are two separate issues at hand. The first is, as a public entity, if anyone comes to a football game and they have a dog with them, we can only ask two questions. Is this a service animal for the purpose of a disability? And is the service animal able to perform a task for your disability? That's all the questions we could ask. We can't ask them, do you have verification of training? And that's federal ADA, big no-no. We cannot, literally what would constitute harassment. Now, if it's obvious that this is Fifi and, it is not performing any task, and you can identify that. But I would caution, it's unfortunately a very unregulated law in that you will see individuals at the grocery store with a dog in the cart, and you know for a fact this is not a service animal because they would be all four paws on the ground. But as a manager of that store, is that really how you want to address this? Because can it be a potential lawsuit? So when we have visitors, those are the only two things we can ask of them. If there are staff or employees, because that service animal is going to be an accommodation for their education and or their employment on a regular basis, that gives us more opportunity to ask them to provide more information, because we would be accommodating them under IDA or under the ADA for our staff. So it's two different.
I appreciate that, but both of these policies will potentially be active. And 383 says service animals in schools. It doesn't differentiate if it's staff, if it's student, if it's visitors, if it's vendors. And this is saying that the task must be directly related. So it reads to me like we need to confirm that in some way. And comfort or emotional support, it clearly says that is not included here. So we would have, I mean, we could just ignore everything, I guess, but then what's the point of policy? So again, my original concern is if we pass this on to the full board, again, not looking at all policies that are related to each other, which I think is always a bad idea, we could potentially have two active policies that give two thresholds for how you address issues. And I don't think that's a great idea.
Understood. Under procedure, it does explain part of that, which is the only two questions you can ask: whether the animal is required due to a disability and whether it can perform work or task that associated with that disability. But again, it does not address the staff part where we would ask for that documentation. So I do see the correlation that one
And I
can
get it,
understand.
that's in the updated policy, but all three of those policies would be active at the same time.
Oh, it's on the Rule 1. It's under procedure as part of the process of reviewing the executive whether the animal is required due to a disability and whether the work or task the animal has been trained to perform is for that disability. And again, that is more designed for students than staff, but that's basically by law the only thing we can ask an individual who's visiting us.
And you
So
said Rule 1, but did you mean 383.1?
383.1.
No worries. I just wanted to make sure we're talking about the same thing. And again, my other concern is that is very vague. It doesn't delineate like this updated policy does who does what when, and the different things you can ask for an employee who's asking for an accommodation and a person just coming into the building.
Correct.
Board President Johnson.
Dr. Garrison or cabinet members, is there a time urgency on this policy?
So we do have, well, I don't want to violate any space.
It's a yes or no question.
Yes.
Okay, then may I suggest that what we do is move it forward and to the full board, and at the next board meeting, when it comes before the board, ask the board to waive these other 300 level policies until you guys can retire them. Is that doable?
Do you mean suspend the policies?
Thank you. Suspend the policies, yes.
If I may.
Absolutely, Mrs. Almonders.
I think that as long as the district is acting in good faith in providing our staff member with the accommodations that they're requiring under ADA, although I do appreciate moving it forward, I feel that we would still be acting legally and appropriately for our staff member if this gets pushed through tonight or not. I just don't want to create a huge disturbance, it would be great to have something, but we're still honoring the needs of that employee at this time.
I just want to make sure that be clear across the board that we will act in good faith whether this move forward or not. So that's for your question. I had to say yes because we would be doing it regardless if we move it forward or not.
So to clarify, you're good with not moving it forward tonight and still taking care of the employee?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Thank you for the consideration.
I am going to ask a stupid question because there's a lot of experience sitting in this room. So is there any way to flag a policy, to refer it to the new policy until we can get it? I don't know. Is that, how do we do that, Michelle?
So, excuse me, once this process is done and we retire the 2-300 policies, I could leave the numbers there for a while and then just say, please refer to policy 512, animals on district property. And then people that would look for it in the 300s, because that's where they're used to seeing it, would know to go to the new policy.
Okay. Policy committee members, what say you? Thoughts? Board Member Levy, do you have a thought on that?
I have several thoughts, but I don't have anything new to say, so
Okay.
I won't be supporting this because of all of the reasons I previously listed.
Board Member Hankins?
Yeah, I just kind of lost a little bit. Whether, let's say we move to approve this, what is on tonight, are we just talking about a week where we're in a quandary until the board meeting? Kind of? No? Oh, so it'll go to board and then back to policy. So any action we take tonight will not go to the board on Tuesday?
If you don't mind,
Yes.
so if we move this policy forward, the 512, the 383 and the 383.1 and 512 could potentially all be active at the same time. And some of the information is not aligned or clearly defined. So you have a murky policy, you have a more clear policy, and they're all active. So I think that's bad practice, but that aside, if you want to do what I believe is bad practice and kind of the best possible way to do a bad thing, you can, as Board President Johnson suggested, move this on. If people are comfortable, you can waive that first reading so it doesn't have to sit at the regular bit for a full month. And then you can also at the same time temporarily suspend 383 and 383.1. And then hopefully it will be on the agenda at our next policy meeting, and then you can retire them.
Perfectly understood now. Thank you.
Oh, no problem.
And that would-
Or, I'm going to jump on my soapbox for a minute, but it'll be brief. You can look at policies as a set and eliminate all of that.
Yeah. I think I heard that before.
Yeah.
Board Chairman, I'm not sure where we're at with this motion. Would you have a motion in a second? I can't remember. Okay, thank you.
Can we start it with the motion?
You didn't get the motion?
I will say I do not remember a motion, sorry.
Oh, no, you're right. You wanted to start.
Yeah.
So you took us out of sync.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. So, move to recommend for the full Board of Education approval the addition of policy 512, animals on district property for first reading. Do we need to tie that all together? Or can we?
Just need to ask for a second.
Okay.
I second.
Well,
Actually,
Are you making the motion?
yeah, actually, we need a first before we have a second.
So moved.
Okay, I second. Any more discussion? I think we've discussed this pretty well. Any others? Nope.
I just want a point of clarification piggybacking on what Board Member Levy said about if we move this forward, and then, just so I know, when she said something about we do a second reading
Jeff,
Tuesday.
if you don't mind. So when a policy leaves the committee, the natural cadence is for it to go to the full board for a first reading. So let's say that happens on the first Tuesday of the month at a regular meeting. And then if nothing changes, like then we go to a second reading. That'll be on the third Tuesday of the month, just depending on when it falls. Now, if there are no objections, it's pretty straightforward. You can waive the second reading and just go ahead and approve that policy so it becomes active. Sounds like that is the will of this committee, and of course, it's up to the full board, but for this updated policy to become active as soon as possible, so there's no ambiguity. Now, what you can also do in the waiving of the second reading is also have a motion, as long as it's noticed on the agenda, to suspend policies 383 and 383.1. So you can always suspend part or the entirety of any policy. The board can do that. In this case, since it seems like this is going to move forward, that might be prudent, so you don't have multiple policies covering the same content, and two of them are kind of vague. And then the third one is very clear and kind of itemized as to what rules apply to which groups. Does that make sense?
Oh, very much so, and thank you.
Here to help.
So the second reading would happen at the board level. We don't have to say anything tonight about that when we move this forward. That is correct?
Well,
Correct.
if we move this forward to the full board, it would be on the second meeting of the month, 2 weeks. For the first reading, and we could waive it. The second reading, so it would be done. So in 2 weeks, it'll be just under a day short of 2 weeks. Okay.
I understand.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Okay.
No action by us for that. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Nays?
Nay.
Okay. Moved it forward 2-1. I do have a question, Board Member Levy. So can we deal with these at the board meeting, the other two policies, at the regular board meeting in 2 weeks?
Well, yes, because the full board needs to decide if you're going, and I think it's
wait.
prudent for
Yeah,
the full
right.
board
Yes.
to decide if you want to suspend a policy.
Yeah, I agree. That's why I wanted to clarify that. Thank you. Moving on to item 3A, formation of an ad hoc committee to study the topic of student cell phone use in our schools. Just let me get all my stuff together here. So this is for discussion and potential action. You know, I know we passed a cell phone policy in, what was it, April or May, something like that. And it was 443.5, April 9th. Since that time, there has been a lot of discussion and, media attention. I've seen articles. I attached one from the Washington Post about, pretty much eliminating the use of cell phones in middle schools and high schools. I I'd like to open it up for discussion. I would say this, there are numerous, I attached one article, there are numerous articles out there on just about everywhere you look about school districts doing this. Some school districts, literally some states are doing it. And I think, and apparently I heard that you tried this a few years back and it really didn't go well. And but that's the past, can't change the past, but we can try to change the future. And so there's also folks in the community who are very passionate about this, and that it would. I think the bottom line of the articles that I've read and the videos that I've seen is initially there's some pushback, as we might imagine, because nobody likes change, but there's pushback from students, of course, and even some parents, and they want to be able to get a hold of their child, doesn't matter if they're in class, and so, but the other side of that is, I don't know how many here had cell phones when they were going to school. I, of course, didn't. That was before, when we were still using, a tin can and a line. No, I'm just kidding. We never had any issues. Honestly. So, but I think in what you would see, the commonality of all these articles and videos is that at the end of the day, the students are more engaged with each other. They're not looking at their cell phones, the videos, the TikToks. Discipline is way better. And I know Mr. Hankins will be sharing a few things he's got on his mind. So, so it's even improving attendance. So I just think it's something to look at, and that's why I suggested, an ad hoc committee to maybe take the ball and run with it. But that's why we're here. So I open the floor. Board member, I don't know, were you first or?
I wasn't keeping track.
Okay, all right. Mr. Hankins, go ahead. I was actually looking at you.
Thank you. Yeah, in the last 6 months, I'd say there seems to be a national movement to the cell phone outright bans, and like you said, I know there is a state that's implemented it. Most recently, I just saw it again, some other districts going to it, and the immediate, after you get through the logistics of doing it, the immediate results for student achievement and engagement in the classroom, as you pointed out, is just mind-boggling, taking those cell phones away, yes, and there's some separation withdrawal, of course, as we all would be, and somebody took my cell phone away. I just, the positives, there's a district in Canton, Ohio that got the ball rolling for me, and I've talked to the superintendent out there. He sent me information. They've implemented it a year ago. So they have data, they have a year-old data. So it's not like, and I know this is for discussion, and I think it's great. I think it would be derelict in our duty to not at least look at it. As we're all trying to raise our student achievement, this could be a major, major shift at no cost. And we don't have to invent the wheel. There's districts doing it already, and sure we'll make some mistakes if we get that far. But I think it's definitely worthwhile to at least investigate. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hankins. Board Member Levy?
Thank you so much. I am typically all for a good ad hoc committee. However, in this case, I don't support it, and here's why. Unless I'm misunderstanding, it seems like an ad hoc committee would either say, keep the policy exactly the way it is, modify the policy in some way, or just ban the phones and we don't need a policy. So those are the three categories that I'm thinking we could potentially get back from an ad hoc committee. And here are my concerns. I don't think the policy needs to be adjusted, and there's just 3 sentences I would like to read. So one, it's mobile phones, and we kind of went through how people don't have cellular phones anymore. They're much more advanced than that. You basically have a supercomputer in your pocket. So number 1 on the student use of mobile phones. At the high school, students may use mobile phones before and after school, during their lunch breaks, in between classes, as long as they do not create a distraction, disruption, or otherwise interfere with the educational environment. At no time is it permissible for students to have their mobile phones out during class unless the teacher has given permission to students for an educational purpose. So a couple things. I don't think we need to edit the policy. I think we need to enforce the policy. And I was really fortunate to attend the WASB Summer Institute, and it was centered around AI and technology. And why in the world would we take such a powerful tool from our students when it can be used well? So again, if you don't have permission from your teacher to use your phone for an educational purpose, absolutely follow the policy. It should not be out. And if it is out, then you follow the code of conduct. The last sentence I'll read actually talks about other levels. So at all other level, student use of mobile phones is permitted before and after the school day, except as otherwise noted. So again, you have permission from an adult in the building to use the phone. And then it talks about what the school day includes. After a day like today in Georgia, which is far too frequent, I want to be able to get a hold of my child in an emergency. Am I calling my kid during class? Absolutely not. But if something happens and I want to know if my baby is okay, I absolutely want the ability to do that. So again, I am opposed to this because I would envision the ad hoc committee coming back with revise the policy, don't change anything, or get rid of phones. I am not okay with getting rid of phones, and I don't think the policy needs to be changed. The policy just needs to be enforced.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. Dr. Garrison?
You know, one of the responsibilities that the district has is to monitor how we are implementing policies. Now, you can go into the high school right now, and there's going to be a group of teachers that say, yep, get rid of them. Yep, you're going to find that. And then you're going to find another group of teachers that say, you know what, I don't have any problems with cell phones in my classroom. And then you're going to find another group of teachers that say, well, it's chicken or egg. Sometimes I have problems, sometimes I don't. The one of the things that I truly believe is that we have the responsibility of educating our students the proper usage of cell phones and its overall impact on your achievement or on their achievement. I do agree with Mrs. Levy that, you know, I don't know if an ad hoc committee is necessary in this space. However, we can easily have a committee at the school level. That's because this is a day-to-day thing, if you ask me, at the school level to address the concern and talk about how are we doing with this policy. Is it a continuous concern? How can we make some possible changes to it if necessary? But we, of course, and our full transparency, we did just, you know, go through this a couple months ago looking at the policy. As it reads, you would think, well, technically the only time they can use it is on their own free time, minus the teacher saying you can have it in the classroom.
For an educational
or for an educational purpose. So it's not like they can just, the student has it out and they can just be playing around with it in the classroom and, you know, playing, you know, Tetris. I don't know, people don't probably play Tetris anymore on their cell phones. Snake made us way back a long time ago, you know, that we connect the dots. And I'm sharing that real lightheartedly because I think sometimes we forget that our students are responsible. Our students can be responsible. I mean, naturally, this is a learned behavior, the connect the connections that they have with the devices, because they're always on it, or one could argue they always have it. However, I do believe that our current policy as it reads, you only have a few opportunities in which they can actually use it. If it's enforced, we should be at a pretty good space in our school district. It not being enforced, where students are on talking on it and Facebooking or social media surfing, that can be a concern as it pertains to their attention on their academics in the classroom, which I've heard that argument multiple times, and I don't disagree with it, because I don't think that's okay. This is a long conversation. This is one of those that school districts have had for multiple years, not just this year, right? We've been having this conversation since the cell phones took its space, pretty much late 2000s, when it really started to become a prominent concern here in the school district, and in the United States, I should say. But then I made this statement: the cell phone, I believe, is over 40 plus years old, 50, 45 plus years old. The cell phone, I think the cell phone is that old now. The first one was made. And here we are still talking about, can we use it or should we not use it?
Well,
40 years ago.
Well, the first ones were pretty large, so you wouldn't be carrying it around in your pocket.
No, you wouldn't be carrying that around. That's correct. That's why I say late 2000s. But we've been having a cell phone for quite some time now, and we're still talking about, are we going to use it and are we not going to use it? And I just got to be honest with you all. The way AI is moving, and as a school district, it is our responsibility to educate. It'd be virtually impossible. If you don't have the cell phone, it's just use it on the computer. And now we are a one-to-one district at high school. You can still do everything you want to right here on the computer in the classroom. You can talk on it. You can. There's a lot of different spaces where technology is part of our environment. It is definitely part of our learning environment, and we just have to be real careful around how we monitor it. And like Mrs. Levy mentioned, we do need to enforce our current policy that we currently have. And again, I did have a conversation with Mrs. Pills about this, since we was going to have a discussion naturally, and that was part of our conversation. That of course you're going to have a group of teachers that's going to be in each part of those groups, and we can sit down with our teachers and figure out, is this being enforced? Are we not meeting the mark, and what could we do differently? And that's ongoing though. That's what we do daily.
Right. Are you done? Dr. Pearson, are you done?
Oh yeah, I put my hand down. Sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
you're good.
Your microphone's still on.
Oh, sorry.
So I appreciate what you're saying, Dr. Garrison, that everything that's on the computer you can do on the phone, and vice versa. When I was teaching post-COVID, there were students who would bring their cell phones to class, and when they were disrupting the class because they were on the phone, or where they were not, being on task because they were texting on their phones, whatnot, those phones went into, places in their, places on their body that I cannot go. And I'll tell you what, to try to put this computer in one of those places is very different. Okay, so there is a difference between the size of a computer and the size of a cell phone. And I understand, let's enforce our code of conduct, let's enforce our policies. There are some students that I'm hesitant to say use the term addicted, maybe attached to their phones would be a better term. So attached to their phones, that even when they are told repeatedly, don't do this, don't bring the phones, whatnot. I had standardized tests that the entire class was nullified because even though they were informed ahead of time, do not bring cell phones to the class during standardized testing, sure enough, one student, at least one student, brought a phone, the phone rang in the middle of the test, nullified the entire classroom. None of those test scores at that point then counted because of the regulations for that test. The cell phones it's a very difficult situation for teachers, particularly middle school teachers, to have to deal with it, because at that age there is some attachment to those phones. Probably post-COVID, that was how they had their, how they, stayed in touch with their friends, and I understand and appreciate that. They are a distraction in classrooms.
Board Member Hankins.
Just getting back to what was on our agenda, I don't want to get stuck with the forming an ad hoc committee to study this. Maybe that's a sticking point to some. I do believe discussion is what we're doing right now, and I'd like to further discuss this and hear much more, from. I was fortunate enough in the fall to be invited. I attended the Calibrate Academy, however you want to phrase that, for all the building admins here. That was a perfect environment to get a gauge on something like a move like this. I know it's hard to get them all together, but maybe I think they do have to have a voice. I think the BEA needs to have a voice. Obviously, parents, blah, blah, blah. It's going to take a long time with a lot of input. And when I first started talking about it, I mentioned the Canton district. Well, Beloit district is different from any other district that I know of, and I preach that heavily, that we are a unicorn district. We are our own district, and we can't compare ourselves to others. And I try not to, and I think the input, I very much agree that it needs to be discussed. Implementation is way at the end of the line, but as long as we move forward with discussing presentations or whatever on both sides of the coin and even the middle of the road, and as Dr. Garrison pointed out, and there wasn't consistency, and I don't think he meant that the part of it, but teachers treat it differently. In some classes it's okay, and in other classes it isn't. That's not good, and it's got to be a consistent, implemented policy. And I'm not, and I know Dr. Garrison is speaking, that's what happens, and I know that's what Emily Pells would tell us, that, there's schools of thought inside the school. But if we're trying to, in my mind, raise student achievement in any way, shape, or form, I'm more than willing to look at it. And as long as we move forward with something and not just squash it, we can say we're going to enforce a policy and that will make it good. To me, that doesn't cut it. We need more input, and we need to make sure that implementation, they have the tools to implement it, and it's not taking away space in the classroom to deal with phone usage, that they have to kick them out or whatever they're going to refer them. So, in my mind, as long as we just keep discussing this and moving it forward, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Levy. Board Member Hankins. Board Member Levy.
Thank you. Just for clarification, I got a little confused when you said as long as we keep discussing it and moving it forward. The agenda item is for us to discuss whether or not we want to have an ad hoc committee formed. So if we could weigh in on that, I think that's going to get us closer to adjournment. So I am opposed for the reasons I just stated. I don't think we need a separate ad hoc committee, because in my mind, they would either say, keep the policy as it is, modify the policy or get rid of the phones, and we don't need to have a policy about them except don't bring them. And I just think the way the world is today in an emergency situation, I want to be able to contact my child, and I believe other parents and guardians and loved ones feel the same way. But I think the policy as it is written, if it was enforced, it would alleviate the problems that I am hearing being alluded to, and we would have more focused students, which would in turn, we would see those increases in student achievement. So specifically, I am opposed to an ad hoc committee for this purpose.
One thing I'd like, I believe this was to the entire board. One of the 20 plus year professional educator at the high school, I think, wrote the board a memo, an email right after the end of the school year, recommending something such as this. And so, I know one teacher, but with 22 years of experience, you know, it hit me. And Board Member Levy, I hear what you're saying. I will share, and I don't remember if it was this article or another one I read, but it was a kind of an expert in the field. I don't know if it was a former law officer or not, but said that, you know, in a situation that like happened today, that get to a place of safety is the most important thing. You don't want to be using cell phones. I'm just saying. That's what the article said. I'm only repeating what I heard. So.
If I may, since you
Sure.
directed that to me, I mean, God forbid if we are in an active shooter situation, just for clarification,
Yes.
I am by no means saying phone a friend.
No.
You get to safety, and once you are, then you can let people know that you are okay.
I hear you. I agree with that. Board Member Hankins.
Yeah, I guess I misspoke a little bit, Mrs. Levy, with and how I stated that. When I said move forward, I didn't mean move forward with the ad hoc committee or this agenda item, which I know we have to either go forward or backward. My intent to say was just that we keep the discussion moving in whatever form it takes. And if that means voting down on this, and then with the caveat that we do it at a different level, a roundhouse with a community table. I think the district has to weigh in first before we go to the community. It's my initial reaction, but I apologize. When I said move forward, I just meant with the discussion of cell phone usage. Thank you.
No need to apologize at all. You're completely fine. And in the spirit of full transparency, I would like for us to move towards adjournment after we've handled all our business. So that's why I was trying to prod us along, because the action item here is, do we want to take action and recommend that an ad hoc committee is formed? So I just wanted us to get to a decision so we can move forward.
What is the will of the committee? I guess I'll ask that question. I think we're, Board Member Hanks, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think what you're suggesting is that we continue to discuss this issue moving forward with, people that we run in, talk about, we're visiting a class, talk to the teacher, we're visiting a school, talk to the principal, the AP, we hear from, Dr. Garrison does, the cabinet does, and then we continue to monitor and see, is this something we need to, really sit down and have a more serious discussion again, so.
That is exactly what I'm saying. I don't know if there's a tool within the district, if they do mass communications on opinions, questionnaires. How do you feel? To all the district classroom people and building admins. And maybe, I don't know if that is something they do, and I would assume they do at some level. Engage, get a feedback from that, and see what we want to do with that. If that's, Dr. Garrison
Yeah,
certainly could weigh in.
Thank you.
I was just, I was
Go
going to address a question to you. Is that something we could do, Dr. Garrison, is put out a survey to the staff? And when I say staff, teachers, pairs, superintendents, I'm not superintendent. Principals, assistant principals.
I think sometimes, when I think about the work that happens in the school district on a regular basis, these are things that we do internally. So to answer your question, yes, that is something that we could do. But there's a lot of different ways we can do this conversation. And if we lean on just one, we may miss something else, right? And then I'll run into that conversation too. Or, who gets to take the survey versus who don't get to take the survey. You run into that situation as well. I think this is a policy that we have that we're working through in our school districts, and it's my responsibility as your district administrator to make sure that we're implementing the policy as it stands. This new opportunity allows me to say, okay, well, let's do a little more, right? That's what it allows me to do. Let's do a little more. I can ask the conversations to be had more at the high school. I can ask the conversations to be had more with the BEA. I can ask the conversations to be had, let's see what we can do more to make sure that we're capturing not just the will of the committee in this space, but also the will of, kind of where we want to go as a school district as well. Internally, I can tell you, like I've already made a statement, that this is not a new thing. We've been talking about cell phone usage and not using it, right, for quite some time in the district, both in the past and even now. And so we will continue to do that, I believe, if you allow me to do my part, which is to have these conversations with my staff, with the staff that this directly impacts, and with the students that this directly impacts. I think that we can continue to have the conversation that Mr. Hankinson stated. Now, again, you're going to split hairs on this. I'm going to be honest with you all.
I can't split hairs.
There's going to be a lot of people that's going to say, get rid of them. There's going to be a lot of people that say, what are you doing? And so I'm open to having a conversation as long as we're able to keep having a constructive conversation around there's a proper way to use a cell phone in the school. There's a proper way to not use a cell phone in the school as well. And if we can do that effectively, I think we'll be meeting the needs of what we're really here to do as a school system. And so to answer your question again, yes, we can easily do a survey. Yes, we could easily, but I would say once you do one thing, I say, what about this? What about that? So allow me to sit down with Mrs. Pels and start having some conversations around what does this actually look like in the high school. Let me sit down with the middle school principals and ask them, hey, what does it actually look like in the middle schools? Because right now, the middle schools, they come in the building and they're supposed to put it inside the locker. And then they go on to class. It's not even supposed to be necessarily in the class. So it's not even a thing. So just...
We're supposed to stop at softball.
Correct. So it's like one of those things. So it's like, okay, well, let me continue to have the conversation to see where we are lacking or where we're not implementing the policy as it stands.
Could I make a suggestion that we give Dr. Garrison and his staff a month, and we'll just bring it back and see what he's learned and what he can share with us at this level before we do anything further? I would be more than happy to help Dr. Garrison in gathering information if he needed, someone to help. But I'm not sure where we are are we on a motion?
No.
Okay.
We don't really have to do anything. I mean, we can.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're discussing. Anyway, I'm happy that this discussion has taken place.
Okay. We'll just, Dr. Garrison, we'll touch back. We can communicate back and forth, and if we want to discuss it again, we'll bring it up in another future board meeting in a month or 6 weeks or whatever. No doubt. So Board Member Levy, you have another answer, a question.
I do, thank you so much. Just to ask that we not leave out BLA. I know the discussion has been Beloit Memorial in the middle schools, but we do have 2 high schools. So just make sure that BLA is included in the discussion.
Okay. Very good. Okay. Next meeting date, Wednesday, October 2nd at 5:30 PM. Can I get a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second? And I'm sure there's no discussion. I'm going to go out on a limb. Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. At 7:36.